Good morning, church. I pray that everybody's staying safe and warm over this weekend with the inclement weather that we're having. And I hope that we get to see each other again very soon. If you need anything over this weekend, don't hesitate to reach out to me, to one of the elders, one of the deacons, and we'll make sure that we can help you as much as possible. Over this last few weeks, we've been studying a sermon series entitled Following the Way. And each of these lessons have revolved around the mission statement that we have here at Goodlettsville. And the statement goes, we exist to make and grow followers of Jesus Christ. And we do that in three ways: by being together with Jesus, by becoming more like Jesus, and by doing the things that Jesus did. And over the last 2 weeks, we've walked carefully through the first two. In week one, we talked about being with Jesus. We talked about what it means to abide in him and how we have to spend time with him and learning to be present with him and with each other. Last week, we talked about becoming more like Jesus, and that transformation is a lifelong process, that God is at work in us, and that this change is powered by his spirit and not by our willpower alone. And all of that matters because before we ever do anything for Jesus, Jesus wants us to be formed by him. But that formation is not the finish line. Formation leads us somewhere. So here's the pivot between last week and this week. Last week, we asked the question, who am I becoming? This week, we ask a different question. Where does that life show up now? Because formation without movement becomes stagnant. And movement without formation is just exhausting. So today, we're not talking about doing more church. We're not talking about adding more programs, more meetings, or even more activities. We're talking about doing what Jesus did. And before we look at how Jesus lived this out in his own life, we need to name something really important. When we say doing what Jesus did, we don't mean doing spectacular things. We don't mean even becoming busier or more impressive. We mean living a faith that moves. Because following Jesus was never a stationary experience. Jesus didn't say, stay here and think about my words. He said, follow me. And following always implies movement. It implies direction, and it implies leaving one place and moving toward another. That's why formation always leads to motion. And if being with Jesus shapes us and becoming like Jesus forms us, then doing what Jesus did means that life has to go somewhere. It has to show up. It has to move beyond intention and on to action. It has to take place in real time, in real places, with real people. So when we talk about movement today, we're talking about not doing more. We're talking about going where life already takes us and letting Jesus shape how we move through it. And when you look at the life of Jesus, you begin to notice something. That most of his ministry didn't happen when he arrived somewhere. It happened along the way. Or think about Luke 24 on the road to Emmaus. These two discouraged disciples walking away from Jerusalem. Jesus didn't summon a meeting. He walks with them. He listens. He asks questions. And he opens up the scriptures. And somewhere along the road, their hearts began to burn within them. Life wasn't the interruption to ministry. Life was the setting of ministry. Jesus didn't carve out ministry time from his real life. He didn't say, this is my ministry space and this is just my everyday life. He treated everyday life as holy ground. And that matters because many of us assume that doing what Jesus did requires something dramatic, something special, something planned. But most of Jesus' work happened in ordinary motion. Which brings us to movement number 2. Jesus didn't separate life from ministry. Here's another way to say it. Jesus didn't wait for the perfect moment. He didn't wait until he had more time. He didn't wait until the crowds got a little thinner. He didn't wait until he was less tired or less busy. He ate meals. He entered homes. He walked the roads. He attended weddings. He showed up at funerals. He allowed the interruptions to become the encounters. And that's important because we often assume ministry begins after life settles down. We'll say things like, when things slow down, then I'll be able to give more time to personal Bible studies one-on-one. When the kids get older, I'll be able to do more ministry work. When work isn't so demanding, that's when I'll be able to step it up. When I just have more time. But Jesus didn't operate that way. He didn't clock into ministry and clock out again. He didn't divide his life into sacred and secular compartments. He lived fully present wherever he was. Doing what Jesus does, it doesn't mean preaching sermons or performing miracles. It means showing up. It means paying attention. It means entering people's lives. And sometimes the hardest part of that is just simply being available. Which brings us to movement number 3. Jesus was present. One of the most striking things about Jesus isn't what he did, but how he did it. He was present. Sure, he was tired, but he was present. He was busy, but interruptible. He was fully human and fully engaged. In John 4, he's sitting by a well, weary from his journey. He's thirsty, he's tired, but instead of checking out, he engages a woman in conversation. And that conversation not only changes her life, but the life of the entire city. In Mark 6, Jesus tries to pull away with his disciples to rest, but the crowds follow him. And the text says he had compassion on them, not annoyance, compassion. Let that sit for a moment. Jesus didn't minister because he had unlimited energy. He ministered because he was available. Availability, not ability, was the engine of his ministry. And that's good news for us because most of us don't feel especially gifted or trained or impressive. But we can be present. We can listen. We can be available. So when you step back and look at the whole series, you can see how these pieces, they fit in together. Being with Jesus helps shape us. Becoming like Jesus transforms us. Doing what Jesus did means letting that life show up in real, ordinary places. The mission doesn't move forward because we add more activity. It moves forward because transformed people live transformed lives right where they already are. So let's just slow this down a little bit and make it a little more personal. Doing what Jesus did doesn't start with going somewhere new. It starts with seeing where you already are. Your home, your workplace, your school, your neighborhood, your daily routines. These aren't obstacles to the mission. They are the mission field. And this is where we often feel the pressure, like we need to do something big, something impressive, and something public. But Jesus didn't start there. He started with presence. So here's the invitation for this week, the homework, if you will. Not a 10-step plan, not a new commitment card, not a guilt-driven challenge, but just this. This week, be present in one ordinary place with one ordinary person in one intentional way. That might look like a conversation you usually rush through, a family moment you usually multitask through, a neighbor you may weave at and keep moving, a coworker you usually keep at arm's length. I want to encourage you this week to slow down, to pay attention, and to show up fully for the people in your lives. Not to fix, not to preach, not to impress. Just be present, because presence creates space and God does his work in that space. And I want to say this clearly, especially for those who feel stretched thin. You don't have to change your schedule. You don't have to add more responsibilities. You don't have to become someone else. God isn't asking you to do something that you can't. He's asking you to live faithfully where you already are. The same God who is forming you is the same God who goes with you. So if Jesus already has our hearts, the next step is simple. Let his presence shape how we show up where we already live. The mission of Jesus doesn't move forward in platforms. It moves forward through people who show up in other people's lives. So the rest of this day, the rest of this week, don't ask, what more should I do? Rather, ask, where is Jesus already sending me today? And how can I be present there? Because that's the way of how Jesus' life and his legacy continues. Godspeed, and we'll see you again real soon.